What is good, NIO family? It's Rey-Jay back with another video, and in this one, I'll break down what's going on with the overall market, what you should be watching for moving forward. I'm also going to break down why tomorrow is going to be an absolutely massive day as we have CPI coming out. I'm going to break down how this may affect NIO and also SPY, Tesla, and the QQQ. But before breaking anything down about all this information, before I get into any more details, let's talk about what's going on with NIO and what the news is saying about it, and how on earth the CPI may affect it. Let me just mention a couple of things before starting. I'm firstly not a financial planner, so make sure you take none of this as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out the Webull link, which is down below and in the description. If you sign up for Webull, the link down below, and deposit any amount of money into the account, you are guaranteed up to 12 free stocks. The offer ends in just 6 days, so check it out before they run out. With that out of the way, let's get on with the video. All right, so anyways, looking at NIO was down 4.34% for the day. We did have some bearish news that came out involving a lawsuit, but besides that, there are other important things we have to look at. But for now, NIO is down, and we have another very big catalyst that will affect how NIO moves. It's going to be CPI. Now, as far as earnings go for today, we have Disney coming out very, very soon. Then we have Alibaba tomorrow before the market opens. This will have a big effect on how NIO moves, so make sure you're ready for Alibaba. Their earnings is going to be quite significant, but another thing that's going to be very significant will be how the whole market moves. That's going to be heavily dictated by CPI coming out 1 hour before the market opens. We also have initial jobless claims coming out, and we want this to be very close to the consensus. But the truth is, this won't matter as much. What's going to matter a lot more will be the CPI report right over here, 1 hour before the market opens once again. What are we expecting? How should things look? Basically, looking at this right here, you could see many investors are expecting a 3.2% to 3.3% CPI. Most of them are saying like 3.3%. That's like the most popular opinion. And we want core to be around 4.7%. That's a small difference from the 4.8% we saw in June. That's what we're expecting. We will see if that ends up being the case. Now, moving forward, I just want to mention that as time progresses, we're not sure what this is going to look like. If CPI is 4.8% or higher, the market, and I'm talking about core CPI, by the way, sorry about that, core CPI, if core is 4.8% or higher, the market could get a rug pull. On top of that, you have to account for what the headline CPI is. If both of these are hot, the market's going to get a rug pull. We're going to see a big drop. If CPI is 3.3 to 3.4% or higher than that, we're likely going to see some downside as well. If CPI is 3.2% or lower and core is like 4.6% or lower, then the market could get a bounce. But this will all depend on these numbers. We'll have to wait and see on that. Now, I just want to mention that gas prices did go up just a little bit. They're up about 3 cents per gallon relative to the previous month of June. So that's June compared to July. This could be significant. It could have a negative effect and lead the overall CPI to go up, but there's no telling how this is going to play out. So here's what I'm looking for on SPY. This is also going to be similar to what happens to the S&P 500. The SPX is going to lead this, but I like to talk about SPY because it has nice setups and it tends to follow SPX anyways. But I just want to mention that there's a falling wedge forming on SPY that does not guarantee anything. However, if CPI is a little hot, so we might see this scenario play out where it drops all the way down to like 442, maybe even lower. It could drop a little bit lower than this and just start taking towards 442, which is where we have an unfilled gap. If it's a very, very hot CPI, if CPI is lower than expected, expect a gap up, and this thing could start pushing back into like the 450s, for example. That is a real possibility. It all depends on CPI. So far, the market's dropping, approaching it, and this is part of why the market sold off. For NIO, we also had this news that came out as the U.S. judges have once again approved a NIO investor class action lawsuit over the factory claims. And this is some important news right here. In America, the NIO investors can proceed as a class action lawsuit claiming that NIO lied about building its own factory in Shanghai during its IPO in 2018. The judges have basically approved of it and they're allowed to go forward with this. They're seeking, once again, damages from NIO. They're demanding that there's going to be some kind of compensation, and they're once again fighting about this. Moving forward, they claim that NIO claimed that they were going to basically build their own Shanghai gigafactory, and then they ended up not doing that. There's no factory that ended up getting built. They kind of just like backed on the idea, and we're continuing to see them arguing about this. Once again, NIO does not necessarily have anything to say just yet from what I'm looking at, but we'll see if we get any response from them. They also mentioned that when NIO disclosed that the plant would not be built in March of 2019, there was a big drop, and many investors are just saying that they were misled by the company, and the lawsuit just continues to go on. So we'll see how this goes. I mean, this is some important news that came out. This is some negative news for them, and this is another reason why NIO is selling off. But besides that, NIO is still looking neutral in UBS's eyes, and the price-price ratio is declining a little bit. That's a sign of weakness for NIO. And in terms of seasonality, we tend to be green only about 50. It's actually like 50-50 for Thursday, so nothing new over there. The short interest went up and went down just a tiny bit over the last few days, but it still is elevated. And finally, the volume is 57 million, a little bit below average. So overall, that is pointing the same directions. But the question is, what is NIO looking like? What's going to likely happen to it? And here's my answer. It all comes down to CPI. If both, okay, the headline CPI and the core CPI are above what we're expecting, the whole stock market is going to get a rug pull. I want to warn you about this, okay? The bearish case I showed you on SPY is going to play out. We're going to see SPY come down to 442. NIO is going to get a rug pull all the way down into the 12s, most likely. We're going to be watching around 12.5 potentially for support. NIO is going to come down pretty hard if we get a hot CPI. If CPI is as expected or lower, same thing with core CPI. If both of them are as expected or lower, we could see NIO try to fill this gap and push all the way back up to about 14 plus. We could see at least $14 again for NIO. For SPY, if we get a hot CPI, we're going to be watching this thing come all the way down to about 442 if it's too high. 442 is going to be very possible. If CPI is lower than expected, expect this thing to push up above 450. Or even higher than that, it could go to like 452 plus. For Tesla, if we get a hot CPI, Tesla's going to come all the way down into the 238 area or lower than that. 235 becomes a real possibility. We have that unfilled gap way back here. Tesla could fill this gap and continue dropping into the 230s. It's very likely it will end up doing that, but we're going to be watching to see what happens with CPI first. If CPI helps the market bounce, we could see Tesla push up for 250. If not, Tesla's going to be well into the 230s very soon. And then last but not least, before I talk about NIO again, for the QQQ, okay, if we get a hot CPI, this is going to come all the way down to, it didn't just fill these gaps already, it's going to come down to much lower levels. We could see this thing approach 363 as a possibility, if not 360 flat. And if we get a bounce, you're going to be watching it retest about 375 plus. For NIO, once again, NIO is going to be dictated by the markets. Another factor that could affect it is going to be Alibaba's earnings. So all these things together could affect it. But in my opinion, it could go either way depending on CPI. That's very hard to predict. From a technical standpoint, NIO looks more bearish as we're getting a bearish cross in the PPO. So odds are favoring downside a little bit more, but just to be safe, we'll have to wait and see what CPI brings us. If NIO gets a bounce, don't forget 14 plus is a possibility. If we come down, watch 12.5. It all depends on CPI. And until I see you guys again, thank you so much for listening. NIO to the moon because the long term is still very bright despite the short term fluctuations. And peace out.